Hello there my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial we're not going to learn how to make any jewelry but rather some jewelry storage / display using resin. So you can really use this for any kind of jewelry and completely make it your own style as well. In the video I just have a few examples of what you could do with it, and of course show you how to do it, and then you can just take it away and make it your own. And I also think these would make great presents for anyone you want to give something personal to. Now all the products I'm using in this video here were kindly provided to me by Let's Resin, and of course there'll be links to everything in the description box down below, and I really do enjoy using their products and can highly recommend them. So I guess without further ado, let's just get into it, shall we? And let's get started. Now the first thing we're going to need, and probably most important as well, is of course the resin itself. Now the one I'm using is a 1:1 ratio. We'll need some measuring cups to mix our resin in and separate it out as needed. I highly recommend silicone ones, it makes it much easier for cleaning. Some stirring sticks for mixing and distributing the resin, I highly recommend silicone again. A protective surface to work on to avoid any damage, and again much easier for cleaning as well. And of course we also need to protect ourselves, so any protective gear like gloves so you can work safely. Now the bases for these jewelry stands are actually geode coaster molds, and they usually come in a set of multiples. And for the pieces that are going to help hold the jewelry, we're using these shard molds that come in many different shapes and usually in sets as well. You can also add something like larger gemstone pieces if you want to, and you can get different molds for these. And of course, if you want to play around with colour, you'll need some alcohol inks. And you can also use something like the white sinker to get that really cool and interesting effect, as you can see in some of my pieces. Now UV resin is what we'll need to put our pieces together to make that final stand. And of course, along with that, also a UV lamp to cure the UV resin. So now we have everything ready, let's get started playing around with some resin. So first of all, of course we need to be protective, so I've got my silicone mat on my desk so I protect the surface, and also some gloves so we can protect our skin. Then the first thing we need to do is start mixing our resin, and like I said, I'm using a 1:1 ratio. So I'm just going to make sure to mix equal amounts of part A and B in one of the silicone cups, and then I'm mixing it thoroughly with a silicone tool. Again, all for easier cleanup. And you want to make sure you mix the resin thoroughly, so you need to mix it for a while until you don't really see any more cloudiness in it, and also make sure to scrape all the sides and the bottom as well. Now in doing so, you will of course see some bubbles form, but you can kind of work with that a little bit, bring them to the surface, the biggest ones you can see, try and get rid of some of them. Now I'm just going to separate out my resin into different cups to have it for different purposes. Of course it all depends on the batch that you've made. Now I'm going to start out showing you how to make the kind of plain or pre-colored version where we color the resin first and then pour it into the molds. I am going to have timestamps down below if you want to kind of jump around in the video. I'm going to show you how to make a rainbow version and use the white sinker later on. But start out by picking your color, adding it to the batch of resin you have ready, and then just give it another really good mix to really distribute the color into the resin. And once you have it ready, you want to grab one of your coaster molds and literally just pour the resin into it. So of course be a little bit slow about it because this can also create some more bubbles, but just make sure that you cover the whole base. You don't have to fill it to the top, it doesn't have to be the full thickness, but just make sure that you also use your tool to kind of get into all the nooks and crannies and get all the resin in there. And again, you can then also use your tool to just get rid of any obvious and big bubbles that you see. And then you just want to set it aside safely and let it cure for the amount of time that it states on your resin. Now because I'm making this piece all the same blue, I'm going to grab some of the shard molds, just picking out the shapes that I want for it, and again mix some more resin with the same color and then start to gently pour the resin into these molds. Now these are obviously small openings, so you have to be a little bit more careful about it. I prefer using the stirring stick and get a little bit on there and just gently pour it in a little bit at a time, and it'll fill up quicker than you think. And of course you just want to do that with all of the pieces that you want to use for this specific base. You can also use one of the smaller tools that will fit into these molds, and as you just fill the bottom layer, just stick it all the way into the bottom to make sure it's properly distributed and get rid of any bubbles that are there. Now when it comes to curing these, I personally like to make sure that they cure while they stand at an angle, so that when we attach them all together, they won't just stick straight up, but it'll give them a little bit more life and kind of realness. So I'm using blue tack for that. You can obviously use whatever you want to. But you can then also fill up one of the bigger molds with the gemstone look if you want to use that as well. Again, whatever color you want. In this case, I'm making a different one where I'm going to be using purple. So that's what I'm doing with this. I'm again using one of the smaller tools to make sure the resin goes all the way into all the points there and hopefully pops any bubbles that might be there hiding that you can't really see from the outside. But again, just fill up the mold nice and slow, a little bit at a time, so you kind of keep control over it. And then of course you also want to leave that to cure for the amount your resin states. Now moving on to the version where we start out working with the clear resin, add it to the coaster mold, and then we add in our alcohol inks. So again, mix up your resin the same way as before, except for the color of course. Pour it into the coaster mold. Again, try and avoid any bubbles, try and get any bubbles to the surface using your tool as much as you can. You can also leave it to sit for a bit. So I filled the one mold here. Try to get rid of as many bubbles. I just push it to the side, leave it for a few minutes, and then because I knew I wanted to make more than one here in different colors, I purposely mixed enough resin to fill multiple molds, and then while the other one's sitting for a bit, I'm starting on another one. So just filling that mold up with more resin. Again, this is going to be a clear one where we add in the color after, and again, same principle, fill it up, try and get any bubbles out, leave that to the side to sit for a few minutes, because that also helps with letting some of the bubbles come to the surface and kind of disappear on their own. Then I'm also taking some of the resin here into smaller little cups, and these I'm then going to mix color into, because these are meant to be for the shards. So of course I'm picking the colors that I want to. You can just make a few at a time to make sure to not get too overwhelmed with it, and also avoid the resin starting to cure before you have a chance to use it. But then I'm picking the color, mixing it in with the small portion of resin here. Like I said, this will be for one of the shards, and in this case it's just a blue one. Mix it nicely just like before, make sure to get all the sides, and then gently pour it into your shard of choice. Again, making sure to get all the way to the bottom. If you need to, you can use one of the smaller tools to get right in there and try and pop any bubbles that might form. Otherwise, fill it up nice and gently all the way to the top, or almost to the top rather, if you want to make it slanted while it's curing like I do. You of course want to make sure it doesn't overfill when you put it into the position you want it to cure in. Otherwise, just keep filling up the shards that you have ready for. And as you can see, for these shards you don't actually need a whole lot of resin in total to fill them. Now again, I'm just going to use some blue tack here to help position them how I want them to cure, so you get that slanted bottom, and they're going to get that effect once we put it all together as well. And as you can see here, it works really well. Now back to the coaster molds with the clear resin that's been sitting to the side for a few minutes. It's time to start adding some color in. Now for the first one here, I've chosen to work with yellow, orange, pinks and purples. So a nice mix, kind of like a sunset or sunrise effect. I'm starting with the yellow, which is the lightest, to kind of get a feel for where I want the colors to be. Now I'm gonna just do it slowly, kind of a drop at a time as far as possible. Place the colors where I want them to sit. Roughly. With the alcohol inks you can only really control it so much, which is almost none at all. But I'm gonna try and do the best I can. I want the colors to all kind of mix nicely but not mix too much, and to do that I'm gonna make sure that when I drop the next color I'm gonna drop it next to the first color rather than say too much on top of it. As you can see, it's still going to mix, but it's going to mix more in a nice and subtle way rather than getting too muddy too quickly. As you can see as well, this new color is kind of then just pushing into the first color, which is then darker on top of the lighter, so it will drown out the lighter one more, but we will get back to and add some more of that later on. So adding in some pink, and then once I'm kind of getting all the base layer for these colors, I'm going to add in my purple, which is the darkest color. And I want to be careful with that because I don't want that to overpower all the other ones too much and kind of take over the whole thing and just make it like a muddy dark mess. So especially with the dark ones, you want to be careful and try and add just literally a drop at a time. Try and be very mindful where you put them and make sure you don't do too much of it, of course, unless you want it really dark. But as you can see, that is very dark compared to the others, and the yellow has kind of almost become non-existent, just a little bit left. So I'm going to add a bit more of that to try and bring that back a little bit. So you can just always do that towards the end, fix any little holes or gaps that you want to just add a bit of color to. You don't want to see the clear resin. Now for the next one here, I'm going to do the rainbow one. So that's obviously 6 colors. So I'm kind of picturing this to be separated into 6 sections. So if you kind of split it in half, you have 3 colors on one side, 3 on the other, and I'm going to try and keep that throughout. So I'm just going to start from one end of the rainbow, start with the red, go to the orange, same principle. I'm trying to do the little triangle sections or pizza slice sections, whatever you want to call them, and keep the colors roughly in those sections like I'm picturing in my head. And you can see again, they are not going to stay in those triangles, they are going to mix. But by trying to keep them in those little sections somewhat, at least you're going to try and control to not have them mix too much and one color getting far bigger, overpowering another color. Again, we're also going to go back over it. This is kind of just the initial placement of the colors. So I'm getting towards the purple, which is going to be the last one. Again, that is the darkest, so be careful with that. I always try and go less on the darker because, as you can see, they spread a lot as well. Even after you've placed them, they're going to keep spreading for a while. So I don't want the dark to take over too much and become a bigger part of the rainbow than, say, any of the other colors ideally. So I can see I can go back and add some more of the red to kind of make up for the space that I have left from the purple. You can go into any other colors, add some more green, add some more yellow. You can see the yellow is getting pushed out slightly here, so I'm going to be adding more of that as well and kind of just play around with it. But when you add these extra drops afterwards, be careful with it because you can also overdo it. So just try and go gentle, and if you need to, you have any gaps, but I don't really want to add any more of the dark, you can use a tool to help kind of spread around the alcohol ink that's already in there and just fill in those gaps a little bit, almost like cheating a little bit, but that's a little trick to make sure we don't then overdo, especially the darker colors as well. And as you can see, we don't have perfect triangles or pizza slices anymore, and that's never going to happen with the alcohol ink. And honestly, personally, I don't want that because I think that is the beauty of it. But once I'm happy with it for now, I'm going to put that aside. The first one I started making has been sitting to the side a little bit. And as you can see, all the alcohol ink has kind of sought in towards the middle, and we've ended up with a bit of a gap around the outside edge. Now that's what's going to happen when you leave the alcohol ink to sit in the resin for a bit. And if you don't want that edge, I recommend you just leave it to the side for a few minutes and then bring it back in like I just have and basically fill in those gaps. Again, be careful because you just want to fill in the gaps, not add too much to make any of the colors overpower. But you also don't have to do that. You can very easily leave it. I think having that edge can look very beautiful. Now the next step then, if you want to do this, is to use our white sinker. And this is where, first of all, you want to kind of just mix it into a little container like this so we have more control. And then before you start using it, you want to give it a really good shake so all the ingredients inside are activated. Then you literally just want to go all over your piece and start putting in drops. So there is no really right recipe for this. You kind of just want to add how and when you want to. So how much is obviously going to then also affect the final result, but you won't really know that until you have experience and until you see the final piece, which you won't see until it's cured. But just add the white sinker wherever, however much you want. And honestly, enjoy the view because it is so beautiful. Honestly, the backside, which is what we're looking at right now, ends up being so beautiful as well. And I almost sometimes wish this was the front, which you could also obviously use it for the front if that's what you want. Now, as for the rainbow, which I left for a bit to the side, you can see these alcohol inks also sort more in towards the middle, so that's also left that gap around the edge, which again I think is very beautiful. You don't need to fill in those gaps if you don't want to, but if you do, just go back in with your colors. Of course, match the colors to the right positions and fill in any gaps that you want to fill in. And then otherwise, once you've done all that, it is time to bring in the white sinker for this, because I really want this for the rainbow effect as well, because that white sinker does add a very beautiful effect, both on the back like you saw, but also very much on the front if you get it right. And we will of course have a look at the front once it's all cured. Now bringing in the white sinker here, same principle. I'm kind of just going to work in the sections, adding some drops to the red one first, adding some drops to the orange one, and then adding some drops to the yellow one, go all the way around, just to get it spread out nice and evenly. But it's not really anything you have to do, that's just kind of how my brain works, because these are already kind of sectioned. Making sure I'm covering the whole base of the area there, and then just go into any spaces you feel like you have, any gaps, however much more you want to add. You can go back around. As you can see from the red and the orange, you have some more gaps because that's moved more from when you actually dropped in the first few drops there, and you can just fill them back in. And once you've done this, of course, with both of them, we then need to leave them to the side while we can enjoy the view for a bit, see all the moving particles in the resin there, and then just leave it to the side and fully cure, and then we can see the final reveal. Now of course, if you need to still do some shards, we can just go back to that, mix up some more resin if you need to, pick out the shards ready to go that you want to use, mix your colors into the portioned out little resin cups here, and then pick your colors that you want for which shards, and then just start filling them up just like I've showed you before. Because if you only have a few of these shards, you will probably have to do this in multiple sessions, and obviously let them cure and then maybe do it again, depending on how many of these you want to make, of course, because I will warn you, it can become a little addicting. It has for me anyway. I've ended up with more than I need. But I guess I just have a few ready to go for presents, which, like I said already in the beginning, it is also a really good present idea, I think. Otherwise, finish up filling up the shards if you need to, and of course use a blue tack to slant them while they're curing if you need to do that as well, and then just let it all cure, and then be patient until it's all ready to demold it. Which, by the magic of editing, we don't have to wait to see how all this turned out, because we're going to jump straight to it and start demolding first of all the solid color one. So the blue one I made here, they're pretty easy to demold from the coaster molds here. Just kind of release the edges all the way around and start to lift out the piece, and then there you have your first base. And you get a really nice and shiny base there, beautiful blue color. I'm going to demold the ones with the white sinker as well, and as you can see regarding the edge, you've still got that edge because they still kept moving after you finished adding in your alcohol ink. So I personally like this edge. Of course it's made it smaller because we did go in and add more the first time around, but you could always do it again if you want an even smaller edge or try and get no edge at all. So this is what they look like. I think they are so beautiful. I just could stare at this for ages. You can just kind of see something in them new all the time. It's almost like some imaginary landscapes, I feel. It's just magical to look at. So I also made a blue one that turned out lovely as well with that white sinker in. I really love this effect, and like I said, I really like the way the backs look as well. Anyway, I'm going to also demold some of the larger gemstone pieces. Now they're also a little bit trickier because obviously you have loads of the shards kind of, but going in all different directions. But just take your time, release around the edge, go a little at a time, go down a bit further and a bit deeper, kind of release a shard at a time until you can kind of get your fingers all the way in there, grab onto the piece of resin and then gently pull it out. And then you should have your nicely almost perfect gemstone piece. Of course this is resin, but it'll make a beautiful effect onto our base there and add to the other shards. And this is what we have here. A bunch of the shards are ready to demold. Now I will warn you, these are quite a bit more difficult to demold, some of them anyway. Some are a bit easier. It kind of depends on the shapes. So some of them are kind of easy enough that you can kind of just wiggle them in and out there, and then after a couple of wiggles back and forth you'll get one out. But some of the shapes are definitely harder to get out. So what will happen is, as you can see, you need to kind of get air down the sides, and some of them kind of create a vacuum seal once you start pushing them out, so it makes it even harder to get them out. Therefore, a little tip could use something like toothpicks. Like here, I'm kind of putting them gently down the sides to create that gap so the air can get all the way down to the bottom, and we eliminate the vacuum seal and then help pull it out that way, and still do some wiggling there. As you can see, that does really help with the really difficult ones I found. So that could be a little tip if you're struggling as well. Otherwise, do your best to try and get them out, so hopefully you can reuse the mold. But then once you got all these demolded as well, you'll have all your shards, and as you can see, they have a bit of slant to them, so that when we get to put it all together, they also don't stand up straight. Now what I also recommend is, if you have some kind of spare molds lying around, have them handy, because if you have any spare resin from any of this, you might as well use it for something. So I had these where you end up with these little stones that are beautiful in themselves that can be used for so many different things. So I do recommend having a mold or two handy for any spare resin. And then once you have all this ready, it's time to move on to assemble everything, and that means getting the UV resin out and the UV lamp as well. So plug that in first of all, of course. Then I'm just going to start with my kind of basic blue one, where I also have a large kind of shard cluster there. I have all my other shards ready to go, and I'm just first of all deciding how I want them all to sit. I recommend doing that beforehand so you have a plan. And obviously I'm going to put the cluster of shards in kind of one, I was going to say corner, it's not really a corner, it's kind of just a round thing, but place that somewhere and then place the other shards around it. Plan it all out. I'm just going to add some UV resin around the edge of the base here. So that's where I'm adding the UV resin, because there's no point in adding it too much all the way underneath, because the UV light won't really get in there anyway. You just want to get it around kind of the outer edge as kind of gently as possible, so not too much seeps out. And then you want to grab the UV lamp, make sure to cure it by using that, which is obviously then a lot quicker than having to wait for the other resin to cure. So that is the beauty of UV resin as well. Make sure you bring the lamp all the way around so all of it gets cured, so we don't have any kind of uncured edges. And then there's the test. Whenever you've cured a piece and you've kind of hopefully finished that up and it's secure, grab the piece you just cured and dangle your jewelry base from that piece, and if that holds, you know it's secure. That's what I do anyway. Same thing with the shards here, just add the UV resin just on the base. You don't need too much. As you can see, some of them I did add a little bit too much and it comes spilling out a bit. Now I don't think it matters too much because it's clear, and it just adds a bit extra something to the piece, I think, because it's all supposed to mimic, you know, the natural kind of way gemstones form and all that. And as you can see here, I'm doing the little test and it holds really, really well. So add all your shards. Now for the rainbow one here, of course I have all my shards ready, and I'm just going to plan it out. I don't really need to think too much about it because I'm literally going to match the colors to the colors on the base, and then just decide whether I want them closer to the center or want them further out towards the edge. And otherwise just crack on with adding the UV resin to the base of each shard. I kind of like to work with one shard at a time. If possible, you can do more, but you have most control if you just do one shard at a time, and then obviously use the lamp to cure this shard in place before moving on. And you might need to hold it to begin with if you're obviously doing the slanted part like me, and I like the slant to be pointing outwards away from the center. That's just obviously the design I want for this piece. Again, make sure you go all the way around the shards, not just on one side, because the light needs to literally hit the UV resin all around for it to cure. That's how that works. Now once you've finished your jewelry stand, it is finished now. What you can do as a final touch if you want to is around the edge add some metallic finesse, or whatever you want to call it. I just did it for the blue one here. I thought that would be quite a nice look, and just an option that you could kind of cover up the edge, I guess is what you would call it, and just make it that metallic edge to it. I think it adds a really nice touch. It makes it even more elegant, and I find that metallic marker works really well. The one I'm using here works really well anyway. I'm going to have a link to that in the description box as well. I can't really say much for other markers because I haven't tried, but this is the one I had handy, and it's actually really easy. You can do a couple of layers if you want to, and otherwise if you want to do the metallic edge or not, you now have your jewelry stand / display ready and finished, and it's all ready to use or gift if that's what you're going to do with it. So this was just a basic really of how to make these jewelry stands or displays, and you can really play around with the ideas for this because you can customize them so much more than I even showed in this video. Of course, these were just some examples and some ideas for you to play around with. And I really hope you like how they've turned out. I personally love that white sinker effect, especially mixed with the rainbow colors. That is just right up my street. Anyway, if you ever make any of these and you would love to share them with me, please feel free to do so. I would absolutely love to see them. You can do on all my socials. Links will be in the description box down below to all of them. So feel free to check them out and also share anything you ever make of mine. And again, just one last thanks to Let's Resin for providing me with these lovely materials so I could finally make this. It's been an idea of mine for many years now, and I really love the way that it's turned out. Like I said, links will be in the description box down below to anything you might need. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Feel free to share it with anyone you know as well that you think might like it too. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.